The trade station outpost Orion floated in the silent void, a beacon of life in the darkness of space. It was a place where hundreds of species gathered, a chaotic mix of merchants, travelers, and smugglers, all coexisting in uneasy harmony. Among the crowd, hidden beneath a thick, tattered cloak, walked Valara, a figure moving like a shadow, careful not to touch anyone. Beneath the fabric of her robes, her skin shimmered with an eerie frost, a terrible curse woven into her very existence. She was a Kivarian, a species feared across the galaxy. A single touch from her could freeze any living being, turning flesh to brittle ice in seconds. It was not a weapon of war, nor a power she controlled. It was a curse she had carried since birth, one that had stolen any chance of companionship from her life. Valara had come to Outpost Orion in desperation. She had heard rumors of a scientist here, one who studied genetic mutations, one who might understand what she was. If there was even a sliver of hope to end her curse, she had to find it. But she also knew the danger she carried. If anyone discovered what she was, they would kill her without hesitation. For now, she needed to remain unseen, slipping through the crowded halls with precise, calculated movements. But fate had other plans. A loud crash echoed through the market district as a group of rowdy traders shoved past, their laughter careless and wild. In the chaos, someone lost their footing, a merchant, arms full of supplies, stumbling directly toward Valara. She had no time to react, no way to escape. The moment their skin met hers, a horrible crackling sound filled the air. The merchant's body turned rigid, ice spreading from his fingertips to his face in an instant. His eyes widened in horror before his entire form shattered into frozen fragments, scattering across the metal floor like broken glass. The marketplace fell into dead silence. Then came the screams. "Murderer!" Someone shouted. "Kivarian! Run!" Another voice shrieked. Guards rushed forward, weapons raised. Panic spread like wildfire. Valara's heart pounded. She had been careful, so careful, and yet it had happened again. No one would listen. No one ever did. She turned, pushing past the terrified crowd, her only thought to escape before they gunned her down. "Hold your fire." A commanding voice cut through the chaos, firm and unwavering. The guards hesitated, and in that brief pause, Valara saw him, a human. He stood tall, dark hair slightly unkempt, a long military coat draped over his shoulders. His eyes were sharp, filled with something she hadn't seen before. Not fear. Not hatred. Curiosity. "You? Stop." His voice was calm but edged with authority. The guards obeyed, though their fingers hovered over their triggers. Valara stood frozen, unsure whether to fight or flee. No one ever tried to speak to her after a death like this. No one ever gave her a chance to explain. But before she could react, the human did something impossible. He took a step forward toward her. "Don't come closer," she warned, voice sharp, urgent. But he didn't stop. The crowd gasped as he slowly raised his hand toward her, the way one might approach a wild animal. Valara flinched. He was insane. Did he want to die? She had seen hundreds turn to ice at the slightest touch. If he made contact with her, his body would freeze solid in an instant. And then it happened. His fingers brushed against the edge of her cloak. Then, against her wrist. Against her skin. And nothing happened. Valara's breath hitched. The human frowned, looking down at his own hand, then back at her. He was alive. No ice. No frozen flesh. Nothing. The entire marketplace stared in stunned silence. No one understood what they were seeing. Least of all, Valara. For the first time in her life, she had touched another being, and they had not died. Valara's mind raced, her breath shallow as she stared at the human before her. It was impossible. No one had ever survived her touch. Not once. Not in her entire life. She had watched creatures of all kinds, tall, short, armored, scaled, furred, freeze and shatter within seconds of touching her skin. But this man, this human, stood before her completely unharmed, his gaze locked onto hers with a mix of confusion and intrigue. The crowd had fallen into a stunned silence. Even the station guards, who had moments ago been ready to gun her down, hesitated. Whispers rippled through the onlookers, voices filled with disbelief and fear. Some stepped back, as if Valera's curse might still spread beyond her control, but the human didn't move. He examined his own hand, flexing his fingers, as if expecting to see frost creeping over his skin. When nothing happened, he looked back at her. "You're not what they say you are," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Valera took a step back, her mind screaming at her to run. This was wrong. It didn't make sense. She had accepted long ago that she was untouchable, cursed to walk alone forever. Now, in a single moment, that truth had shattered. She didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. But one thing was certain: if the station authorities didn't understand what had just happened, they would kill her anyway. She turned sharply, preparing to flee, but the guards finally shook off their shock and raised their weapons. "Don't move!" one of them barked. Valera froze, muscles tense. A wrong move would mean death. She had been hunted before, had been forced to escape places like this too many times to count. And yet, before she could think of an escape plan, the human stepped between her and the soldiers. "Lower your weapons," he ordered, his tone firm. The guards hesitated again. "Do you see what just happened? I touched her, and I'm still breathing. She didn't kill me. That means we don't know everything about her kind." "Captain Vance," one of the officers said hesitantly. "She just turned a man to ice in front of the entire station. She's dangerous." "She's different," Vance corrected. "And if there's even a chance that her condition can be understood, we owe it to ourselves to find out. I'll take responsibility." A murmur spread through the gathered officers. Valera remained perfectly still, her mind reeling. This human was insane. Why was he protecting her? No one had ever tried before. "I can't let you do that, Captain." A new voice entered the conversation, colder and sharper. A tall, armored figure stepped through the crowd. Commander Harth, the station's security chief. His expression was unreadable, but his hand hovered over his holstered weapon. "I respect what you're trying to do, but this isn't up for debate. That thing is a threat, and she's not leaving this station alive." The air became thick with tension. Valera could see the fight brewing in Vance's stance, the way his shoulders squared, the way his jaw tightened. He wasn't going to back down. And for some reason, that unsettled her more than the weapons pointed in her direction. She wasn't used to people fighting for her. She wasn't used to anything but running. "I won't let you execute her without understanding what just happened," Vance said. "She's not attacking anyone. She's not a monster." "She killed a man," Harth countered. "She didn't do it on purpose," Vance shot back. "I saw it in her eyes. That wasn't an attack. That was an accident." Harth exhaled sharply, clearly losing patience. "Enough." In a blur of movement, he drew his weapon, aiming directly at Valera's head. Her heart clenched. This was it. This was how it would end. But Vance moved first. In an instant, he lunged, grabbing Harth's wrist and twisting it sharply. The shot fired, but it missed its mark, searing into the metal wall behind them. Chaos erupted. Valera's instincts screamed at her to flee, but she hesitated. She had always run, always left destruction in her wake. But this time, someone was risking everything for her. And that changed everything. Vance wrenched the weapon from Harth's grip and shoved him back. "Stand down," he ordered, voice like steel. The guards hesitated again, thrown into confusion. That was all the time Valera needed. She turned and ran. But she didn't make it far before Vance was beside her, grabbing her wrist still unharmed. "Come with me," he said, urgency in his voice. "I know a way out." Valera didn't understand why she trusted him. Maybe it was because he was the first living being who could touch her without fear. Maybe it was because, for the first time in her life, she wasn't running alone. Without another word, she followed him into the unknown. Alarms blared across Outpost Orion as Valera and Captain Elias Vance sprinted through the dimly lit corridors, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Security forces were in pursuit, their voices barking orders through the station's intercom. Valera had been hunted before, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't running alone. Vance led the way, his movements quick and sure, as if he had memorized every passage of the station. Valera struggled to keep up, her mind still reeling from the impossible truth he could touch her without turning to ice. The thought should have given her relief, but instead it terrified her. If humans were immune to her curse, what else didn't she know about herself? And more importantly, what would happen if the rest of the galaxy found out? They rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a patrol of guards. Vance reacted instantly, grabbing Valera's arm and pulling her behind a row of cargo crates. Shots rang out, scorching the metal near their heads. He drew his sidearm, returning fire with precise, calculated bursts. The guards hesitated, taking cover, giving them just enough time to slip through a maintenance hatch. Vance slammed the door shut behind them, sealing it with a manual override. Valera could hear the muffled shouts of security trying to break through. It wouldn't hold them for long. "This way," Vance whispered, leading her through a dark service tunnel. The air smelled of coolant and rust, the hum of machinery vibrating through the walls. Valera's chest tightened. Everything inside her screamed that this was a mistake. She should have escaped on her own, disappeared before things escalated further. But she had made a choice to trust him. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vance didn't look at her as he moved. "Because I don't believe in killing something just because we don't understand it." Something in his words struck her. She had spent her life being feared, hated, hunted. No one had ever stopped to question if she was more than a weapon of death. No one had ever tried to understand. But now was not the time to dwell on it. The security forces weren't their only problem. The real danger arrived moments later. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the tunnel, sending a chill down Valera's spine. Vance froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. The noise came again, a low, rumbling growl, followed by the sound of heavy boots on metal. Valera's heart pounded as she recognized the signature energy readings flickering on the terminal screen nearby. The Zathari had found them. Her blood ran cold. The Zathari were elite hunters, feared across the galaxy. They had been hunting her species for centuries, determined to wipe out every last Kyverian. If they had tracked her here, it meant only one thing: her presence had already spread beyond the station. The news of a Kyverian who didn't kill humans would change everything. And the Zathari couldn't allow that. "We need to move." "Now," Vance said, his voice lower, more urgent. They sprinted through the maintenance shaft, emerging onto an upper catwalk that overlooked the main docking bay. Below them, chaos had already begun. The Zathari, clad in their dark, armor-like exosuits, had engaged the station's security forces. Energy weapons flashed through the air, the scent of burning metal thick in the atmosphere. Valera clenched her fists. The Zathari didn't care about the station. Their only goal was her, there. Vance pointed toward a small, sleek starship docked near the edge of the bay. "If we can reach that ship, we're out of here." Reaching it, however, would be nearly impossible. The Zathari were already moving toward the docking platforms, cutting off all escape routes. Valera took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. She had spent her life running, hiding. But if she wanted to survive, if she wanted answers, she needed to fight for them. She turned to Vance. "You trust me?" His eyes narrowed. "I just risked my life for you. What do you think?" Without another word, Valera pulled off one of her gloves, exposing her icy blue skin. She placed her hand against a nearby coolant pipe, and instantly, frost spread across the metal, freezing it solid. Then, with a swift kick, she shattered it. "Move!" she shouted, and they ran. Under the cover of mist, they weaved through the chaos, dodging gunfire and leaping over fallen debris. The Zathari, blinded by the freezing fog, struggled to track them. Valera and Vance reached the ship just as the last docking clamp disengaged. Vance slammed his fist against the controls, and the airlock hissed open. They scrambled inside as the engines roared to life. The moment they were aboard, Vance took the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the controls. The ship lurched, rising from the docking bay just as the Zathari forces recovered from the confusion. They opened fire, but Vance was faster. With a sharp pull of the throttle, the ship shot forward, dodging the incoming blasts. The station's exterior loomed ahead, and with one final burst of acceleration, they broke free into the void of space. Valera collapsed into a seat, her body shaking from adrenaline. She looked at Vance, who exhaled a breath of relief, his hands still gripping the controls. They had escaped. For now. But this wasn't over. The Zathari wouldn't stop. The entire galaxy would be looking for them. She had spent her life being chased. But for the first time, she wasn't running alone. Valera sat in the dimly lit cabin of the starship, her fingers tracing the frost patterns forming on the metal table. The cold never hurt her, but it was a constant reminder of what she was: cursed, untouchable, dangerous. Yet, Captain Elias Vance had proven otherwise. He could touch her without freezing. He had risked everything to help her escape the outpost, and now, as they drifted through deep space, she found herself facing a truth she had never dared to believe. There might be a cure. Vance stood near the ship's console, checking the star maps. "The coordinates you gave me, are you sure this is where we'll find it?" Valera nodded. "The research station on Tarvin 5. If the records are true, they were studying Kyverian physiology. They were trying to find a way to suppress our freezing touch." Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt a storm of emotions. Hope. Fear. Doubt. Vance exhaled, crossing his arms. "If this works, you won't have to run anymore." She wanted to believe that, more than anything. But things were never that simple. The Zathari were still after them. The station authorities wanted her dead. And worst of all, she didn't know if she could trust what they would find. But they had no choice. If there was even a chance at a cure, she had to take it. Hours later, the ship landed on Tarvin 5, a barren, ice-covered moon orbiting a dying star. The research station stood like a ghost in the snow, abandoned for years. The silence was unnerving. As they stepped inside, the lights flickered weakly, barely holding on to the last remnants of power. Dust-covered terminals lined the walls, and shattered glass crunched under their boots. Valera moved quickly, scanning the old computers, searching for anything useful. "Here," she whispered, pulling up a file. "Project Cryoheart." Her pulse quickened as she read. They were testing a serum. It was never completed, but they were close. Vance leaned in, his expression unreadable. "Do you think it will work?" Valera hesitated. Only one way to find out. In the center of the lab, a reinforced storage unit remained intact. With a few commands, the lock disengaged, and the compartment hissed open. Inside, a single vial of pale blue liquid glowed softly. The serum. The supposed cure. Valera's hands trembled as she picked it up. Was this the end of her suffering? Could she finally be free from the curse that had haunted her entire life? She didn't have time to answer that question. A sharp, metallic clang echoed through the station. Both she and Vance spun around just as the doors sealed shut behind them. A cold, familiar voice filled the air. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come, Valera." Her blood turned to ice. "Commander Harth." The comms crackled, and his voice continued. "Did you really think you could run forever? You're not the only one who wants that cure." Valera's grip tightened around the vial. "You don't care about a cure. You want to control it? To control me." A bitter chuckle. "You think too highly of yourself. You're just another weapon, and weapons belong in the hands of those strong enough to use them." Valera forced herself to move, every muscle screaming in protest. "You won't win," she rasped. Harth knelt beside her, his smirk widening. "Oh, Valera." "I already have." Vance raised his gun, scanning the dark corridors. "Where is he?" Before anyone could react, a sudden surge of electricity flooded the room. Valera barely had time to cry out before the shock knocked her to the ground. Her body convulsed, pain searing through her veins. The serum slipped from her fingers, rolling across the floor. Through her blurred vision, she saw Vance struggling against the same electrical charge, his body rigid with pain. The doors hissed open, and boots echoed against the floor. Harth entered, flanked by armed soldiers. His gaze landed on the vial, and a cruel smile tugged at his lips. "I should thank you for finding this for me." He picked it up, holding it to the dim light. Imagine the possibilities. An unstoppable assassin. A perfect soldier. Or maybe the last Kivarian, completely under my control. The world blurred as another wave of electricity hit her, and everything went dark. The Galactic Council chamber was silent, an unnatural stillness spreading across the room as the representatives of 100 species waited for the decision. The air was thick with tension, the fate of an entire civilization hanging in the balance. In the center of the vast hall stood Captain Elias Vance, the lone human among a sea of alien dignitaries. His posture was straight, his expression unreadable, but deep inside, he knew that humanity's future was at stake. The Exalari Dominion, the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, had issued an ultimatum: surrender Earth's resources and accept subjugation, or face annihilation. The Council had gathered to decide whether humanity was worth saving or if they would be left to their doom. Vance's voice cut through the silence. "We are not asking for charity. We are offering something greater than wealth, greater than power." His eyes moved across the room, meeting the gazes of warlords, diplomats, and rulers, most of whom had already dismissed humanity as weak, as unimportant. "You all see Earth as nothing more than a small, insignificant world. But let me remind you of something you all once thought the same about your own ancestors. And yet, you stand here today because someone chose to fight for your survival." A murmur spread through the chamber, but the Exalari representative, Supreme Chancellor Vorak, only smirked. His dark, scaled features twisted with amusement. "And what exactly does humanity have to offer that we do not already possess?" His voice was cold, filled with the arrogance of an empire that had never lost a war. "Your species is young, fragile. What could possibly make the Council risk war with the Dominion for your sake?" Vance took a slow breath, then stepped forward. "Hope." The word echoed through the chamber, a single, simple truth. Some of the representatives scoffed, others leaned forward, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Vance continued, his voice steady. "Throughout history, humanity has stood against impossible odds. We have fought, we have bled, and we have endured. When faced with destruction, we do not surrender. We rise. We adapt. We survive. And we do not forget those who stand with us." He glanced at the delegates from smaller worlds, the ones the Exalari had conquered, the ones who knew the pain of being powerless. "The Dominion will not stop with Earth. You know this. They never do. But we, humanity, do not fear the impossible." A heavy silence followed. Then, a deep mechanical hum filled the chamber as a holographic display activated, projecting a live transmission from the edge of human space. The gathered aliens gasped as the image of Earth's fleet came into view, hundreds of warships, hastily built yet standing together in defiance. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they did not waver. Every captain, every soldier knew what was coming, and yet they refused to retreat. Humanity was ready to fight, even if it meant extinction. Vance turned back to the Council. "This is who we are. We fight for our future, and for those who believe in something greater than fear. But if we fall, the Dominion will not stop. One day, they will come for you. And when that day comes, you will wish you had stood with us." For a moment, no one spoke. Then, a slow, deliberate sound broke the silence. The representative of the Uthran Alliance, an old and powerful race, stood and placed his staff upon the floor. A sign of support. One by one, others followed. The Council chamber, once divided, now stood united. Even those who had doubted humanity before now understood this was not just about Earth. It was about the survival of freedom itself. Chancellor Vorak's smirk vanished. He could see the tide turning, but his voice remained calm, mocking. "You truly believe your words will change the course of history?" Vance met his gaze without hesitation. "Words alone do not win wars. But they can start revolutions." And with that, the vote was cast. The Council had chosen. Humanity would not stand alone.